Okay, wheel 1, lesson 2, refresher. We're just going to do a quick refresher on trimming. Take my mask off. Okay, so first thing you're going to do, obviously, is get your piece centered. Remember, we get it spinning. Bring a needle tool or your trimming tool into the side. Make a mark. Find that mark. Move the piece in the opposite direction. And again, we're not going to be frantic about this. We're just going to try and get it as close as we possibly can, because there's a good chance that our piece is not perfectly round anyway. Okay, so just get it close as possible. Okay, take a chunk of clay and you're going to turn it into a rope, or a coil if you will, about between 8 and 10 inches long. Try and keep it around at least a ½ an inch in diameter. 3/4 might be a little bit better depending on. Okay, and you're going to take your piece, break it in half, and just kind of bring it up to your form. Bring your coil up to your form and just very gently press it up against there, very slightly. Then press down to the wheel head about halfway between the coil. So halfway into the coil, you just press down, making sure you're working directly opposite. Then a little turn, curve your coil around your pot, and same thing. You're just going to want to push down. Just always make sure you're working opposite, directly opposite. Your thumbs are working directly opposite, and that way you won't be pushing your piece out of center when you press it down. Give it a little check, make sure it's locked in. Here, that's pretty good. You're going to get your trimming tool. Okay. Get your wheel going at a, not too fast, sort of, just about like, something like that. And again, the first thing you want to do, obviously, is we want to get rid of that rough edge. So we're just going to bring our piece in. I've got my index finger on the center of my piece, and my thumb is resting on my other hand. I'm just bringing my tool in and slowly starting to remove material until I get that rough edge smoothed away. Okay? The next thing I want to do, remember, I want to try to align my edge here with the sides of my piece. So I'm just going to start about a quarter of the way down the piece and slowly bring my tool up, removing a little bit of material until I get to the very edge. Okay? Good. Next thing I want to do is I just want to round off and create sort of a gentle curve. So I'm just going to use the tool to sort of round the piece. As I'm moving it from top to bottom, I'm turning it from vertical to horizontal. Okay? Coming in horizontally and moving it to vertical. Okay? So I just create that nice rounded edge. Starting out horizontally, rounding it to vertical. Okay. All right. The next thing we want to do is we want to put our foot ring on. So remember, we're going to define an outside diameter first. So we're just going to bring our tool in. Let it spin. So that's the outside diameter. Now we're going to set the inside diameter. I like to leave about a 1/4 of an inch of a foot ring. I brought this one in pretty far. This is probably a little farther than I should have, but that's okay. Now, again, to define the foot ring, you're just going to remove this excess material, starting with the exterior, the outside portion. And we're just going to try and follow the curve that we created early on. Going slowly. We're not removing a lot of material, we're just moving a little bit of material at a time. Doesn't really matter if you move from here to there or from there to here. You just want to make sure that you're stopping or starting right at the edge of that piece, of that outside diameter. Okay? Keep them working. Almost done with the outside. Alright, so there's that. Might clean up this side just a little bit. So it all ties together a little bit better. When I took this piece off the wheel, as you saw in the refresher course, I warped it pretty bad, but that's okay. Alright, now I just need to remove this interior material from my inside. Remember, I slide it now. Instead of holding down the center, I've moved my finger over to the side just a tiny little bit to allow the tool to be in the center. It doesn't really matter if you're working from outside to inside or inside to outside. Again, as long as you're stopping at the edge or starting at the very edge of that inside diameter. Remember, we talked about a couple of things. We talked about, how do I know how deep to go? That's going to be experience, and you're just going to have to check your piece before you start to trim it. It'll give you an idea, and you can just work with that idea. And if you were wrong, you've made a planter. You know how I feel about planters. Old plants. Alright, so that's basically it. You can make this, try and smooth it out if you want, so that there's no trimming marks, by keeping your tool as flat as possible. Remember, I also mentioned that if your piece is too damp, you're going to find that as you're pressing down with your tool, you're starting to push the bottom of your piece up, the inside bottom of your piece up. If you feel that that's happening, just stop and wait a little bit and let your piece firm up just a little bit. Okay? We also talked briefly about getting rid of that trimming texture, right, by using a metal rib or your wooden rib. Just kind of pressing it against the side, letting it spin. You can do it with your metal rib, you can do it with your wooden rib. We also talked about using your sponge. and your fingers. Right? Just getting a little bit of water on the outside of the piece until you see a little bit of slip forming. That's the slightly lighter clay you see starting to show up on the surface of the piece. And once you see a little bit of that slip forming, then just take your finger and follow the form. And that'll pretty much match the same texture as when you were throwing the clay wet. There'll still be a little bit of a difference, but not enough to write home about. All right. Then, last but not least, don't forget to sign your name or use your little chalk symbol. I have a little kanji that I use. It's Ishi, which is Japanese for stone, which is my last name. All right, there you go. Trimming. Wheel 1, Lesson 2, refresher.